Okay, hello everybody. We're going to get started on this webinar for teaching people how to develop a data management plan. And the first thing I want to do is introduce Kate Anderson from the library, MU Libraries. And she's going to actually, so she'll actually be giving most of the talk about developing data management plans, and then I'm going to come on and say some things more specific to the Missouri Transect project. So, and now I'm going to start sharing a screen again so we can get started. And there, okay.
Great. Thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned, I'm Kate Anderson. I'm the head of the Zolk Veterinary Medical Library here on campus, and I'm also the chair of the MU Libraries Data Management Education Working Group. So this is something that the libraries are very interested in helping people figure out how they write their data management plans, where they can put their things, and we consult and that sort of thing. So today we're going to talk specifically about the NSF data management plans. I'm going to start by giving kind of a bigger overview of why these are even a thing now before, and then as Chris mentioned, kind of later on, I'll turn it over to her to talk specifically about the EPSCoR data management plans. I don't know if any of you, if your offices look like this, where stuff is just strewn about. Just think of this in terms of the digital world as well. Like a lot of our files basically look like the equivalent of this as we're starting on projects and stuff. Just all over the place.
Would you like offices? Oh, don't worry, thank you. I just have it. So
People, they can use this, or do we?
1 second here, people. Sorry. We're just trying to mute the participants. Hopefully you can all still hear me. So why are we here talking about data management? And the Data 1 primer has a really great way of thinking about data management, where the goal of data management is to produce self-describing data sets so that everything is of a piece together and it doesn't need your interference to kind of explain something. And we do this because your data are important. That's why you're collecting all of this stuff in the first place. You sort of assume that you need to keep track of it. Data management also benefits you and your collaborators. And this is one of my favorite tweets of all time about reproducibility in science, which is really, you'll hear about this over and over again, about open science and reproducibility in science. And this guy says, reproducibility is just collaboration with people you don't know, including yourself, next week. So I always think of data management as...
But I see that you don't want to be seen eating.
Who's muted? I mean,
I'm just muted down, so we can't hear him.
Sorry, we're just having some technical difficulties here. Make sure people are on mute on their end.
but not on our end.
Close that down. Oh, that's okay.
And so going back to reproducibility, just think of it not only as in terms of your larger projects, but also for yourself so that you are keeping track of your items.
You can move it more towards there.
Data management also obviously benefits science and inquiry. Again, going back to why we are interested in open science. Once the Zika outbreaks were happening about a year ago, the Zika researchers really just put up their data automatically every day as a way to try to keep things open and to get their data out there as soon as possible. Just think of how long it would have taken if they went through the regular peer review route to have all of this stuff released. And then not to put too fine a point on why you need to have a NSF data management plan, it's because your agencies are requiring it and your journals are requiring it, so you'll see it over and over again. This all stems from the 2013 OSTP executive memorandum that basically said the default way of thinking about data is open. And then federal agencies that are larger than $100 million in R&D every year were charged with coming up with how are you going to implement this new policy. And so the agencies did a variety of things, and I've got this one chart here that talks about the public access policies from the different agencies, how DoD is doing it, how DOE is doing it, NIH. Of course, everybody took a slightly different tack, which is always kind of annoying. You're like, really, could y'all come together and just say we're all going to do this? But what we're going to talk about specifically today is how NSF approached this problem. And on all of these agencies, they were looking at two things. One were the articles that come out of these grants, but also the data that comes out in these grants. And you'll kind of see quickly on this chart that the article repositories often have very specific things you need to do, and then the data repositories are still a little bit more malleable about, not specified, pick the most appropriate one. And so sometimes that can be the hardest part, is trying to figure out, well, where should I be putting my things? From the largest perspective of the NSF, they have this very broad policy about investigators are expected to share with other researchers. So that's sort of their default policy. We're going to be sharing. And then how they implement that is within the data management plan. So for proposals that you're submitting to NSF, all of them need to have a data management plan, no more than 2 pages. And a little bit later, Chris will talk about differences between policy and procedure as well for EPSCoR. But just keep in mind, big policy you need to share. For NSF, they are looking for a 2-page data management plan. Do keep in mind that these are subject to peer review, so it can really depend on your directorate. It can depend on your program officer. Contact your program officer if you have a lot of questions about what needs to be in your data management plan. Read the guidelines for your directorate. There are some things in common to all of them, and we'll talk about those today, but some of the directorates have slightly different, and we also want you to do X. And when you start reading all this NSF information about data management plans, they have this huge FAQ section, and whenever someone says, well, how should I deal with my data? The answer is always, what did you say you were going to do with it in your data management plan? So as you're working on your projects and starting your projects, you need to think about, well, what is this plan that I'm going to have in place, and how, because that will sort of dictate what you need to do, or what NSF is expecting you to do with your data. For these 2-page data management plans, NSF kindly gives you different things that you need to keep track of. And I find this as just a really nice kind of a worksheet of, do I know the answers to all of these questions when I'm working on my project? What are the types of data that I'm actually collecting? What standards am I using to describe that data? So they're metadata particular to my data that I am using, and Chris will sort of talk about EPSCoR stuff specifically a little bit later on. And then how are you going to share this information with others, including what is shareable, what isn't shareable, and this can really be project dependent. You need to make sure that you're appropriately protecting people's privacy or confidentiality. So how are you going to work with those types of things? And then also with the sharing, how are you going to let people reuse or redistribute the data from your project? And then finally and lastly, the part that's always closest to my heart as a librarian, how are you going to archive this data? And how are you going to preserve them so that other people can get to them? And built into this question is also the, do I need to archive absolutely everything? Am I going to do all that Doppler radar archiving? Or am I going to do just, okay, I'm kicking off this part of that project, and that's what is going to be archived forever and ever? And you may have seen just a very typical sort of life cycle of data management that goes round and round. And so we'll talk a little bit about kind of this plan up at the top and some best practices that we have for you as you're developing your data management plans. So this is one of the guides that we have from MU Libraries, and talks about, kind of gets you back to those questions of when you're thinking about creating your data management plan, what kind of types of data do you have? What file formats are you going to use? What file naming conventions do you have? How much data are you going to be collecting, et cetera, et cetera? And some practical tips for you about contacting your IT people ahead of time to make sure you've got the needed resources. And also on the left here, you'll see that there's some really nice tools that you can look at, especially that DMP tool. They have guidance by funding agency, so you can go in and say, well, let me look at the NSF one, and what are the questions that I need to make sure that I address. And so as you're thinking about the data management plans, always remember that these are peer-reviewed by your panel. And they are going to be looking for things that are maybe a little too vague or for unknown reasons. It might be that it's appropriate to save all the files on your computer and all of the notebooks in the PI office. It might not be. You need to have some reasoning behind that. Also, think about could someone else understand what you were doing if you just said, okay, I'm going to save all my files with the appropriate metadata. Well, what is that exactly? How am I going to know if that is the right approach for your project? And then finally, that last one is often my favorite, because these are examples from actual NSF data management plans. Data will be available to anyone who desires access to our data. When possible, data will be made available online. Okay, how exactly, to whom exactly, how are you going to do this? What does it look like when it's online? How is someone going to actually do that? So then you can see some things that are just a little bit more concrete. This is an NSF example that's taken from the data and metadata standards section, which talks about, okay, there is an existing metadata standard that we are also going to use for this project, and then we're going to be adding these additional metadata entries. This is the software that we're going to be using, and this is why we chose that particular format. So it gives someone else a much better sense of how you're actually going to approach your data. So you've got this plan, you've collected all your data, and you've made sure that all the data is still there. And you also need to describe your data. So what metadata standards are you going to be using? As you know, metadata is data about your data, and it lets other people discover and understand and use your data. And one thing that often will happen is that people try to put their metadata on their data later. That's always rough, where you're like, what exactly did I do on this? So this is kind of this process throughout the project of, okay, I already know what schema I'm going to be using, and I'm going to use it throughout. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to need to consider. What's the name of it? When did you create it? And stuff like this often seems very simple. So simple that sometimes you don't actually write it down. And then later you're like, wow, what version of the software was that? But it can be anything from what instrumentation did you use to collect the data, what your units of measure are, which again seems like people would do, but then we land aircraft or spacecraft on the wrong planes. Oh, whoops, well, that wasn't in metric. If there's any taxonomic details, also tell people what the known problems are in your data set, so that someone doesn't try to take that data later and make a calculation that you know is never going to be correct. And also let people know how to cite the data set. It's very nice when people have that information, because it also reminds folks, hey, you need to cite this information. And also one tip is to, as much as you can, use non-proprietary formats. So have your README documents in just text format and not in Word. And of course, as we go and we want to preserve all of this stuff, this is one of the questions that the library gets most often about, well, where should I archive and actually store the completed data sets once everything is all said and done? Because it lets other people have a way to discover them. And there's often two ways to think about your data repositories, that there are lots of really great domain repositories out there, anything from GenBank to Data One stuff that's more geological information. So domain repositories lets you store your data with sort of similar items. So researchers in that area are kind of familiar with it, and there might be some subject-specific tools that can be used on that data. And then there are also other things like MoSpace, which is the institutional repository of the University of Missouri. Backed by the university, you can put in all kinds of data sets in there. These are great when a particular subject repository may not exist for your kind of data. Because it's from the university, it sort of preserves the link to MU. And then always be cognizant of domain repositories that might shut down once a grant ends. There's lots of great stuff that lasted for 5 years and then it sunsets out. Something that's available from your institution or from the libraries will be here for a while, we hope. And then we do have on that data management plan guide, we have a whole bunch of lists of where you can submit your data, even including some sort of social science research data, just as some reminders of where you might look if you're unclear. And then again, if you've got sort of this orphan data that doesn't really fit anywhere, then you can use the MoSpace institutional repository. And if you're doing that, it's a fairly simple process. You basically email MoSpace to get things going, and then you'll let them know what the project is, who you are, what kinds of files that you want to submit, and then they'll work with you to figure out the best way to get things in there. And then sort of reaching back around to the data management plans, oftentimes you might need to say to NSF that you're going to be using MoSpace from MU. And we've got some boilerplate language up on our website about how you can talk about MoSpace. Keep in mind that your data management plan is all of 2 pages. This is a really long chunk. And so what most people do is say, this kind of data will be archived in the university repository, and leave it at that, because you need your space for some other things. And then finally, I'm going to just preview a little bit about when you're putting all of these data sets together, do think about the licensing, and Justin is going to talk about that toward the end here today, and how you can make it very clear how other people can use your resources. And then I've got a lot of resources up here for data management plans, and I think we'll send you these slides so you can take a look at those. And then I think that is kind of the big, broad overview from my perspective, and then Chris is going to actually talk about data management plans from the EPSCoR perspective.
Okay, so one reason we are having this webinar today is that our project, the Missouri Transect project, is going to have a data management planning development exercise for the students and postdocs to do. So students and postdocs will be asked to develop a data management plan for their research projects, their Missouri Transect projects. And if there's any student who doesn't actually generate data but analyzes data, or it will be flexible, and you can write your data management plan on other data if you're not actually generating data, but we'll give you more details on how to do this. But I think, so this is going to be a valuable experience for all of the trainees, because you guys are kind of the ones that are really, you're like the first class of scientists to really have this requirement on you. So a lot of the PIs are just now experiencing the need to develop data management plans and don't even have experience yet. So this is a time for researchers to start learning it. And so the CI team will provide advice and feedback. And what, we're also, I'm doing this for a kind of another selfish reason, is that we want to use your individual data management plans to update the main Missouri Transect data management plan. And so just a little bit about the current data management plan. So it's posted on the Missouri EPSCoR website. So you can download it and look at, you can actually see how it was written. And then some people might notice that I mentioned their data type and that I might have been actually incorrect in what I said. And other people might notice that their data type is not even mentioned. And that's because this data management plan was written, actually I wrote it with the help of Kate back in summer 2013, I think. And that was before we actually even knew for sure how, what was going to happen during the Missouri Transect project. So, so we did the best we could, but it can be improved. And so we'll be able to use the data management plans that you develop to help update the main plan. So Kate also mentioned that NSF has a data sharing policy. So some of the smaller projects are not required to actually write a policy, but our project was required to write a policy this past year. So we wrote a data sharing policy and is now posted on the website. And so that's a little bit different than the data management plan in that it actually talks about our policy for when we want to share our data and how we will share our data, but it doesn't provide the details on specific kinds of data. And so I'm just going to have a few examples of just how our data management plan was written. So a few slides ago, Kate showed a list of, I think, 5 or 6 topics that need to be addressed in the NSF data management plans. And so our data management plan has, within 2 pages, paragraphs related to all those topics. And so the first paragraph includes, the very beginning of the data management plan talks about some of the different data sets that would be produced. And so this was based on basically my interaction with some of the team leaders. So when I talked about climate data, I was getting my information from Pat Market, and he was getting information from other people. And so in the long run, it might not be totally correct because the actual strategic planning for our project didn't happen until a year later, when we actually really kind of determined for sure what we're going to do. So we're looking for all the participants, and especially students and postdocs who are actually the ones doing the work to provide feedback. And if you write your own plan, you can write specifically about the data you're producing. Another thing about our overall plan is that we had to fit everybody's in 2 pages, and that was pretty challenging. And so here's just the paragraph on data and metadata standards. So my expertise happens to be genomic data, and so that's, I think, in the second sentence here. So it turns out that I think Missouri Transect probably is not even going to be producing that kind of data. So the rest of this data, I received information from other people, but again, this might not be totally correct because I was doing the best I could with what I knew. So we're looking for people who know better in these subject fields. And then you also notice in the past 2, this slide and the one before, there isn't really much mentioned about any of the community team's data, and so we would be really happy to have input on that. And then here, I skipped a few sections, but here's a section. The last section is the plans for archiving and preservation. This is a very difficult topic, and at the time I didn't have answers to questions, and we still don't have answers of what is the best repository for all of the different data types. So I really need help with this. So I think for many of the smaller data sets, MoSpace will be a very good place to put it. And I believe that since this is a Missouri system project, University of Missouri is the lead, we can take anybody's. Yes, so we can take the data from the other institutions that are not actually in the system, because this is actually, this is funded through kind of like a system university. So people who are not at University of Missouri can still submit their data to MoSpace, and maybe we'll partner with people who are here to help with that. So another part of this, the plans for archiving and preservation, and as Kate mentioned, that it's not necessary to archive every single little piece of data if the scientists don't think it's appropriate to do so. And so, but it wasn't I didn't have the ability to decide what data is appropriate, and so I couldn't say anything about that. So it would be up to the individual researchers to actually determine which data would be useful if it was archived for future use. And for people on the community team, some of your data, it wouldn't be appropriate to archive it because it would be protected information. So that's not the kind of data that would have to be made available for public use. But there's data where where you've done analyses and things where that would be archived. And then some of your data sets might be in Excel spreadsheets that could fit in MoSpace, and some data sets, like if we wanted to save all of the UAV data, that would not fit in MoSpace, and so we'd have to find a different place for that. And we have the same issue with the radar data, but then again, it's up to you guys to determine what would be the best data to save. So do we need all the radar data, or do we need to are there kinds of analyses that we can do to distill it down and then save the resulting data? So we need help to answer all these questions. So another thing that I just want to mention, I think this is the last thing I have, is that we have a server, as you all know, where we share data. And so this is the Missouri Transect server, and we have a new data portal that Justin is here, and he's going to just show a little bit of it when I'm finished. And so this is what we're going to use to share the data during our project. We'll share it with each other, and then we'll also make it available to the public. And then if you go to our website and find our data policy, you'll find out that we are required to share our data. And at some point, we need to make our data available to the public. It doesn't have to be immediately. It could be after publication. That's where you will decide, at what point do you want your data to be made available to the public, and you can include that in your data management plan. But in the meantime, even before it's available to the public, it's required to be available to all the Missouri Transect participants so that people can collaborate. And so we have a data portal that will allow you to do that, but I need to make it clear that this is not a long-term repository, because the server might not last a lot longer after the end of the project. So we still need to find other repositories that data could be submitted to where it could be maintained. And so we on the CI team can actually help transfer your data to the appropriate repository, but the challenge is to find the repository. And so that's all we have for this presentation. I think we should ask questions before we go on with Justin, right? Okay, so I guess let's open it up for questions. Oh, yes, and let me unmute before I miss. Okay, is it unmuted now? Can somebody just say something to make sure we're unmuted? Okay, good, we are. So any questions? Should I stop screen sharing maybe also? Oh, we have to keep screen sharing. Okay, I'm gonna wait like 30 seconds longer.
Remind us that I think there was a little chat bubble that came down when someone has a question.
Oh, how do we get to the?
Go to the top.
The more?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, well, sounds like we don't have questions right now, so I'm gonna go over to the website, and we're gonna get Justin over here to show. Let's see.
I want to know that we're here.
Okay, so we're gonna mute now, and then we'll unmute in a few minutes. We'll mute you guys, not us. Okay.
So this is part of the data site for EPSCoR. And hopefully this will be an easy place to share data. And I think the most pertinent to today's presentation would be on all the data sets. You have the ability to include any kind of file you want. So you could include usage for it, but we also, for each data point, we provide the ability to choose a license. So for example, in these examples I've created, used the Creative Commons license, but as discussed earlier, there's different kinds of licenses that can show people when you share the data, how they can use the data. So I think that's particularly
Is that a pull down menu? Or
so we can show what we've got as far as if we want to add a but when adding a data set, we have the ability to choose all kinds of licenses, and I can add them if someone needs a specific license. I can go ahead and add it. These are just ones that I pulled in that I thought would be useful. These are general common licenses. So you have the Creative Commons, the GNU free, things like that. So I think that would be applicable to what we've discussed today.
And the library has a really good Creative Commons website that talks all about those licenses.
Yeah, and the let's see, the data sets will links specifically to the particular licenses. So for example, if your users want to understand what that means, that will take them directly to the license where they can read up on it and understand how they can use your data.
So now I have a question.
So there's going to be actually another, we're planning to have a full webinar on using the data portal, so we weren't actually planning on showing that much today. But this is just to kind of get started and get you interested. And that webinar will probably be within the first 2 weeks of April, hopefully the first week of April, probably, after spring break. So I'm going to unmute again, and now again see if anybody has any questions.
Well, we have to write it in the chat.
Oh, let's see, chat. Open my chat window.
Yeah, because we can, in our case, I can download in a CVS file all the.
I don't know if you.
What do I upload it into here?
Sandra, are you asking a question or could you mute your line?
Oh, I didn't know I was.
Yeah, we'll mute. Sorry.
Yeah, in the case of Modert, do you hear me well?
Yes.
We can download now the data in a CVS file. So is it my job to then upload it back into this site, or is something that Amy will do, or in our case is not necessary?
It's not, we haven't actually discussed that, but it might not be necessary because yours is already publicly available and it's already, shareable. So everybody can get it from you. So maybe we can
Not yet. Currently, the participants can only access their own data and us can access all the data, but it's not yet open to the public.
I mean, so I think what we can actually work out what is best for you and whether we should also have the data here or whether you want to just keep it there. And then also we can work out, I think that between Justin and Amy and I, we can also work out whether, you would want to be the one to submit it or one of us submits it.
I think it still would be good to be here in the website you are showing, just because it's another way for people to know that the data is available.
Okay.
Yeah, we can discuss that later.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Actually, I mean, if you have any data that's ready to go, even if it's like sample data, we can put it up really soon so it would help us in our data portal webinar to have more data up there.
As an exercise. In this case, the data is just, let's say, a CVS format, or if you have a table or a figure, could that be there too?
Yes, they can all be there. CVS is probably, the best. CVS is good because it's not dependent on having, Excel, but if it is Excel, it's still shareable.
We can export it to CVS.
We can always export it to CVS.
Yeah, because we are already analyzing some data for a conference, and we will be producing figures related to that data. So I wonder if you are interested in those figures that interpret the data too.
Yes, definitely. So we can, we have ways of where we can make it so people could download all the figures at one time if that's more convenient, or download figures one at a time, or
consider.
we can do it.
Oh, okay, good to know. Great, thank you.
Any more questions?
I have a few.
Okay, we have a question here. Can you come? You want to sit over here? I don't know.
Can you guys hear me on the laptop?
Can you guys hear Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I actually had a couple questions. So this website, the data repository, is this just for data, or would this also be like a repository for like publications?
I think the idea of it was so that people can search data and more easily collaborate with each other.
Okay.
With this site, I have the ability for you to make your data public to the public, or public to other groups, or only your group, depending on how you want to share it. So, I mean, you could put a publication on it. There's nothing to stop you from doing it.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah, I mean,
Except if you've totally signed away your copyright, which I encourage you not to totally sign away your copyright. So as you're looking at the publications, make sure that it allows for posting to your own kind of institutional items, so that then you don't get into kind of the legal problems of, oh, I uploaded a PDF to this site, but I was not legally allowed to do that.
yeah, you can totally do that. I will take as much data as you can give us.
The other,
Anything useful.
It seems like there's a lot of different places to have data access, but I don't know if there's anything just like publications based on what the different groups have, submitted or going to submit or have been accepted. That doesn't seem to be something that, I don't know if you're all familiar with something like that.
I think like also if you wanted to share your manuscripts before you submit them, that's fine, right? Because it is a collaboration.
Yeah, and partly because, as I understand it right now, this is sort of locked down to you all right now.
Like
so
he would select,
share
like if it's a manuscript, you're like, it's in progress, but you still want to share it, you would just select a thing that like makes sure that it's not available to the public. It's available to, in fact, this data portal actually allows you to even select who you want to share things with. So most data has to, like data that you generate should be shared with everybody, but if you're writing on a manuscript, that would be appropriate to say, well, I only want to share it with my team who's working on this with me, or something like that.
Yeah, and keep in mind that of all of these kind of larger governmental public access policies, there's always the two parts. There's the data stuff that we've been talking about more today, but NSF does also require you to make your manuscripts, your finished journal articles publicly available. And so there's a NSF repository for that. So eventually they will also make their way into the NSF repository for your journals, your journal articles.
You reminded me of actually another question that I have, or maybe, but you might not be the person who's working on this. Only the people who are developing the models, or you're working on WRF models, right? Or
the WRF was Chastity Henson, but she's not on the project anymore. But Ali Kalini, he does a lot of the WRF modeling, and also Bo Savoma, but I guess he's actually going to be leaving in the next couple months or so. So the ones with WRF experience would be more, I guess, Ali Kalini.
Well, but let me just ask, what is the output of that research? Is it actually model like in the form of MATLAB code, or is it a data set?
Typically, in the WRF output will generally be in GEMPAC format, so it's a very specific format that can only really be read in a specific, it stands for General Meteorological Package, and there's only a few, only in the basement of the ag building can there really be programs to open that. But one of the options that you can do is export that as a NetCDF file instead.
Okay.
So NetCDF is a little more universal, not as much, but you can still access it that way, and then you can grid it into MATLAB or even Excel. You can have it in some sort of, you can eventually turn it into KML files actually as well. I think that's actually an output is KML files as well. So it can be geo-referenced.
The reason why I asked is that I'm also on the MU Cyber Infrastructure Council, and there was a discussion, and I think it was a physicist who asked, he was actually talking about, he might have been asking about MoSpace. It was like, where does he put his code? Because when they do their models, it's actually the form of code. And then they said that MoSpace would take that. So that would be a kind of, like he had Fortran code, and, but whatever. So it reminded me that if anybody is doing any kind of modeling that is actually like the product is code, then the code would be something that you could also put in MoSpace.
And I have plenty of MATLAB scripts too, so. But I also had a general question about the licensing. The licenses. So who ultimately depicts the licensing? So like if I'm generating the data, does my PI ultimately decide what the licensing
I think that's up
is?
to you guys to decide.
Okay.
I would imagine that, you know, based on like what your data policy is, then that probably would dictate what your license is, because the different licenses will allow people to use your data in different ways depending on how some say someone can take your data and modify it in any way. Some say that like it can be used and then needs to be cited. So I think that's for you guys to determine what license best fits your data policy.
So our like the default policy that we wrote into the data sharing policy, which is also can be modified, is that it would be freely available with attribution, meaning that anybody could use it, but they have to cite you. But that is not required. So we also wrote in that it's really up to the institution or individual. So kind of like if nobody says what they want to do, then that's what we would do. But you're allowed to decide for yourself. But you know, as somebody in a lab, I would ask my PI.
Right. Okay.
And that's a really great default one because it does still make it quite open, but it's not as open as some of the other ones that they say you can totally modify all of this stuff. And so having that kind of as yes, it's an open license, but it's not the free-for-all license as the default is a really nice way to go.
Any more questions out there? Can't get to the chat window. Oh, just want to double check the chat window before I say, oh, okay. It looks like we don't have any questions in the chat window either. So I think we're finished. So hopefully we'll see you guys back again in a couple of weeks when we have the data portal webinar. And thanks everybody for coming.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.